Lorcana's metagame has kind of stabilized after the release of Rise of the Floodborn, and I think we've seen the ascension of Amethyst as the top color, given that the Merlin Mim bounce cards have kind of been shown to be a little too good, but there are still some other decks floating around in the format like Ruby Sapphire Pawpsicle and Amber Steel Song. Nonetheless, I do think it's time to upgrade Ruby Sapphire because now that we've seen how the metagame has evolved, this deck needs to evolve in order to react to those threats. So what you're seeing on screen here is my version of how I would adapt this deck for the current metagame. In testing, it's proven to be somewhat effective. It still struggles a little bit because, again, this is a combo deck, and if you don't see your combo pieces, you likely still lose the game. However, being so reliant on the Hiram engine alone can be a big detriment, so we've gone ahead and we've added in the Dinner Bell and Mother Gothel package for extra card draw. This way, you're not just dependent upon seeing a 1 of 4 copies of Hiram in your deck in order to get your draw engine going. You can also get a draw engine going with Dinner Bell. If you do draw multiple Dinner Bells, you can ink the extra copies with Fishbone Quill, so it's not really that much of a detriment in theory in order to play more Dinner Bells so that you do see one at some point to set up the draw engine. It is slow, so if your opponent is on aggro, you might just opt to ink the Dinner Bells altogether and just wait for your Hirams as you try to deal with the aggro threats, which is what this deck does struggle with. And that leads me to another change that we've made to the deck, and adding in Mother Gothels for the secondary purpose as well, but also the Queen of Hearts and keeping the noise. The noise is a little underwhelming because they do lose very hard to Madam Mim, but being able to quest for 2 is nice, and dealing with 1/1 questers that like the Maleficents and the Lilos and even the Pinocchios is nice, but your opponent is likely a smart player and they're not going to leave them exerted for you to take out with Annoy if you have it on board. That being said, the surprise factor of Queen to deal with an exerted 1/1 for quest for 2 character is very nice, and Mother Gothel is just a big body at 2 ink that can deal with Simbas as well as a lot of the smaller aggro threats, and Arthur, which is a pretty big deal. So if your opponent isn't playing slower to protect their cards, it will slow them down on that lore ramp, I guess, and you'll be able to stabilize the early game a little bit better, and that's the reason for those card choices. Again, you do have to see those cards in order to be able to counter the aggro strategy, so it's not always the most consistent, but when you do see them, I do find that it does work very well against aggro. The rest of the deck is more or less the same. We've opted for more top end in order to close the game out better, so 4 Tamatoas and only 2 Nick Wilds, and no ink ramp, no Grammatalas, no 1 jump ahead, and no Mickey. We're ideally want to see the Fishbone Quill on turn 3 so that we can drop Maui on turn 4 to again deal with aggro. Whatever's exerted, we're taking it out. We're looking to stabilize the board until we get to that 7 ink slot where we can drop the Be Prepared. From there, the deck still functions as is. The nice thing about Tamatoas over Nick Wild is the fact that you can recycle your Poisoned Apple, which is just a 1-of in the deck, but if you do see it and are able to recycle it, it can really help stabilize your board moving into the end game, because the decks that beat this deck are the aggro strategies, and if they get up to 15-16 lore by the time you get to 7 or 8 ink, it can be very hard to constantly just out the opponent's threats, because you have to see your Be Prepared and your Let It Goes and your Lady Tremaines and your Maleficents, your Hades. And while there are a lot of copies of those in the deck, you definitely won't see them all every time you need them. And so just having a recyclable resource with the Poisoned Apple, or forcing your opponent to play reactive and deal with your Tamatoa so that you're not questing for big amounts and also recycling that Poisoned Apple, is a way to again slow your opponent down while you try to stabilize the board. Aside from that, the deck is pretty standard, so if you have any other questions, let me know in the comment section below. But if you would like me to do a much deeper dive into this deck, which I can definitely do, let me know in the comment section below as well. But let's go ahead and switch over to some gameplay. So in this first match, we're going second, and we're going to essentially mulligan any of the high costing or uninkable cards that we know we won't be needing in the beginning. And we want to draw a lot of our low cost curve stuff, so the stuff to deal with aggro in case we do run into that matchup. So the opponent went first. They revealed the Steel Hook and a Bell. So they're on Steel Sapphire. I think this was the deck that ended up winning that one major event. And so you can see that they're ramping up on ink as much as they can. They likely have a whole new world, and you would think that that card really devastates this deck, and we do run the risk of decking out when multiple whole new worlds are played. But one of the ways that we can counteract that is by using Fishbone Quill of our own. So the opponent drops a hard casted hook, which is interesting. I don't know why they wouldn't keep the 1-drop hook if they were not planning to shift that, or maybe they drew into that later. We drop a second Fishbone Quill here, and you got to be careful with these steel players, because sometimes they'll act like they have the whole new world, but they won't really, and so you don't want to be overly aggressive. But the fact that they just hard cast the Hades there meant that, you know, clearly they were just trying to dump their hand to Whole New World. So we do lose the extra utility off of using double Fishbone Quill, but it's totally fine because we only lost 2 cards. We still have a Noi on board, and the opponent did give us a fresh 7, and we can definitely utilize this and kind of just maintain the board state. This Sapphire Steel deck, if you do play against it, you, I think, have a favorable matchup. I did play 2 of these, and I won both of these matchups, even though the opponent is also kind of dealing with my board. They're expelling their hand pretty quickly, and they're pretty reliant on a Whole New World. And even if they have multiple copies, as long as I have Fishbone Quills in rotation as well, I can always keep up with them, and my top end threats with Ruby is better than their top end threats with Steel, because my Ruby cards will directly deal with their Steel cards. Like Maleficent Dragon will just banish a Tinkerbell or a Cinderella or whatever other top end threat you might have. So I'm not too worried. The blue cards that end up removing my cards help me, because things like Hades and Let It Go put stuff into my Inkwell, just gets me to where I want to be faster. And here you can see me, you know, despite me dumping my hand really quickly, I do opt to draw 2 with Flavorsham. And the opponent is going to work pretty hard here to expel their whole hand, because they just got a really busted start. They got double Whole New World. They clearly have massive advantage, right? They got 4 characters on board, but we have the ultimate equalizer in Be Prepared. Now, unfortunately, we did discard 1, but you can see again, the opponent is aggressively dumping their hand. And again, these Steel players, they'll sometimes just be like, pretending like they have a Whole New World, and I'm like, the odds you just drew into another one there, I'm gonna say is pretty slim. So I'm not gonna fall for that bait, and I'm just gonna play my own game here. I'm gonna now obviously wipe the board. We're up an advantage hugely here, but again, it doesn't really matter unless if the opponent has another Whole New World, right? So again, we're dumping our hand quickly. And these Pawpsicle draws here are absolutely crazy. We're going to use Fishbone to dump the other Judy, and we just draw into more Pawpsicle, and we draw 3 Maleficent Dragon, and we have a Lady Tremaine. So this is actually terrible if the opponent does have a Whole New World, but if they don't have a Whole New World, this is incredible. So the opponent on 14 ink, just like me, dropped 3 big threats, and I'm like, okay, they have nothing left to cast Whole New World, so I'm safe for 1 more turn here. I'm going to use the Fishbone Quill immediately to ink the Dinner Bell. And I make a bit of a misplay here, forgetting that I have the Poison Apple in rotation, because I could have technically cleared the opponent's whole board. I could have Poisoned Appled away the bell, and then Lady Tremaine to force the Cogsworth out if I wanted to. But I was like, I can deal with the bell questing for 5, since I have total control of this match, and the opponent would only go to 7. So it's not a huge deal. But in hindsight, it is a misplay, because if the opponent did indeed have a Whole New World, I would be in serious trouble. So they play Grab Your Swords, and that was actually a really bad move in my opinion. I think they kind of just resigned at this point. They knew the match was over, because I just crashed the Maleficent, Dinner Bell it away to draw 4, obviously seeing the opponent is on no cards. And I'm like, yeah, unless you top deck a Whole New World, it's not really doing much. Play Tamatoa, hard cast Teeth, just to get rid of the hook that they drew. And then, yeah, I think I just double ink here maybe. Do I use Fishbone to ink Fishbone? Yeah. And then just pass turn. So Maui can deal with a threat because I still have the Poison Apple, right? And so could the Tamatoa get back the Poison Apple. So like I was in just total control of that match. Moving into this next match, I wanted to show you what the mirror match looks like, because this person I'm facing against is actually using what I would consider the old build with like the Gastons and some of those, I don't want to say slower cards, but just like lower impact cards in the metagame right now, versus our version, which is running the Dinner Bell. Now, this hand is terrible because, well, I shouldn't say terrible, because it is playable, but it's very slow. We got the Flavorsham on turn 4, we've got the Dinner Bell potentially on turn 4 as well, and we've got the Mother Gothel up. So just like I've explained in the decklist portion, like you have your choices on what you want to do. In this instance, I'm not opting to draw off of the Dinner Bell with the Mother Gothel. I opt to deal with the Noi on the board first, because I already have the Flavorsham up, and I'm like, yeah, I don't necessarily need to Dinner Bell because I've got one of my 2 draw engines. So we draw off the Judy Hops, killing our Pawpsicle, and then we draw for turn. We draw a Fishbone Quill, and this is what I talked about. Even though you have these bricks, which is very unlikely to draw 3 of in your hand, but if you do run into that, you do what I just do there and just Fishbone Quill away the Dinner Bells that you're not using. The opponent looks like they're in control, but they are 1 behind on ink since they did not see their Fishbone Quill. We're going to drop our Maui. We don't really care about the Nick questing here. And this is an odd play to decide to drop the Mother Gothel here, but I'm like, yeah, if I force out a Teeth and Ambitions, that's fine. But they're going to Teeth away the Maui. And the reason they do this is because if my Maui challenges now, it will get banished instead of going like 3 for 1, but it essentially did because it made them waste their teeth. No point in healing the Nick there, because I'm like, what, like, are you just trying to make me forced to use the Maui there, I guess, and not use my Lady Tremaine? Or not Lady Tremaine, sorry, my Mother Gothel, because if they didn't heal the Nick, I could have used my Mother Gothel, and then I could have Dinner Belled away the Maui to draw 4. But you can just see the difference in the board state here, the card advantage that we have in hand versus the opponent. And yeah, like this is what I mean, like the 1 jump aheads and the Gramatalas and all these cards that we cut out, they are decent cards like when you're winning and can continue to control the game, but they don't do anything to actually counteract your threatening matchups. And so our version here, our hand is stacked. And again, you saw how I played around with Steel in a whole new world. That's like the only thing that kind of messes you up a little bit. But again, if you know how to play around it like I did that last match, you're totally good. The opponent is forced to be prepared, so you can see like kind of what their hand was, what they're sitting on, and they just don't have the draw engine, right? And if they see the Hiram, we're just going to deal with it, right? Because we have like a number of different removal things in hand. So the opponent has no other way to draw cards, and this is the problem with Ruby Sapphire in set 1, is that it was a strong color combination, but without the card draw, you just run out of gas, and so that's exactly what's happened to my opponent. So Deja Vu, we drop another Hiram and Nick, and we're building up an insane amount of items now, which just means when we eventually draw one of our 4 Tamatoas with whatever's left in our deck, it is going to be a huge threat that's essentially just going to quest maybe once, maybe twice per game. The opponent drops a Gaston, and again, just too slow. They don't have the ink, they don't have, you know, even though they were playing like 1 jumps ahead and stuff, they just don't have what it takes to keep up with us at this point. I don't even know how many cards we have in hand, but it's clearly more than double what the opponent has. Superior board presence as well, and we could just drop a Lady Tremaine, a Hades, or a Maleficent Dragon to deal with this Gaston. And I opt to drop the Hades here. In this matchup, giving the opponent ink doesn't really matter, whereas in the other matchups where you're running up against Sapphire, if they give you ink, that actually is a really big detriment to them. It may deal with a threat on your board, but giving the Ruby Sapphire player more ink is not good. In this instance, it doesn't matter because we're both on such high ink in the mirror match, in my opinion. But other Sapphire matches, it does matter. So the opponent essentially at this point has resigned because they're just showing me what they have in their hand, crashing that queen and playing the shield. And again, when you don't see your draw engine or it gets dealt with and you can't keep replenishing your hand, this is why I've opted to run Dinner Bell. So here's a real-time example, guys, of why I think Pawpsicle 2.0 should essentially